All right, let's start. Hey everyone, I'm Aaron van Wirdum. I work at Bitcoin Magazine, and on this panel we're going to discuss Bitcoin and its cypherpunk origins and how much of these cypherpunk ideals are still living on in Bitcoin, or how many of them have gotten lost, and what to do about it if we need to do anything about that. So I'll start with, I'll let my panelists introduce themselves. Let's start with Joerg.
Joerg Platzer from Berlin. Hi.
Joerg is the founder of Room 77, which was the best Bitcoin, the first bar in the world that started accepting Bitcoin, and I would argue the best bar in the world that I've been to.
Thank you. You just said that before. What I want to make is it really became a platform for the Berliner Bitcoin community. It attracted people from literally all over the world to move to Berlin who were into Bitcoin. And it developed a wonderful community. Some of its members are sitting here who came to that place and started building. Aaron has mentioned it before. We saw the first mobile wallet there because somebody said, I cannot bring my laptop here to pay for my beers all the time. We saw the first Lightning payments there. So yeah, it was a community hub. And it was built by the community. I happened to be the proprietor of the place.
And one more question, I'll ask all three of you this. There's like a, if you want to be sure that Bitcoin is a cult, like we have this tradition that everyone sort of has this origin story. Like, how did you first hear about Bitcoin? How did you get into Bitcoin?
How
yourself?
did I?
Yeah.
I read about it on the Metzdown mailing list. And I did not, here's the thing, I did not take it seriously until I actually looked into it.
So this was 2009?
Yeah. And the point back then was, as I tried to point out before, there were, I don't know, my guess is 200 digital cash projects prior to Bitcoin that tried to achieve the same goal, and that they failed either technologically or because they were centralized. E-gold is the best example of that. So I was kind of prepared. I actually didn't think it would happen in my lifetime, and I remember discussing with a friend via mail. Look, because the point was, a new project would turn up, and you would look at it, and you would start discussing with others. How is this one going to fail? You would predict why it would fail. We were looking at Bitcoin, and nobody found a way how it could fail. And I remember that one mail from a friend that said, man, maybe it's actually happening in our lifetime. So I like to say I was into Bitcoin before it existed, because I was literally waiting for something like that. And that's why when it turned up, and I actually looked at it.
Yeah, and so when you really started with Bitcoin or accepted Bitcoin, that was 2010?
No.
29 as well?
No.
Well, the bar started accepting Bitcoin in 2010, right?
I think in 10 or 11.
Right.
It's so long ago, I don't know.
Amir, please introduce yourself for the audience in case anyone doesn't know who you are.
I was going to also say about Joerg's place, that Joerg, in early days of Bitcoin, Berlin became the key center in Europe for Bitcoin, and that was because of Room 77. And for example, Gav Wood, when he funded Polkadot, and the reason why he based in Berlin was because he went to Room 77 and he saw all these other projects and prominent crypto people about. So then a lot of projects all went to Berlin because of Room 77. So about myself, I'm a Bitcoin developer since 2010. And before that, was working on free software for 15 years. And and also played a lot of the influences of Bitcoin today came from like a lot of the work that me and my team and other early people did those days, or the ideas they had, or the kind of stuff that was happening.
How did you get involved with Bitcoin yourself? How did you find out about it?
I was working on open source software for several years. At the end of it, like, my project failed again. So I was like, okay, I have no university, I have like no money, I have nothing to show for the last 6 years of my life. So I became very depressed. I quit from open source. I became a professional poker player for 2 years. After 2 years, I started to get bored with it. I was like, I want to do something more meaningful. And then, you know, I wanted to build a decentralized poker site using decentralized, you know, protocols. And then I started to look into payment systems. There was a guy who's actually here at the conference called Melvin. And then he sent me 8 links. And I went through them one by one. The Bitcoin one, I was like, oh, that's obviously a scam. It said Bitcoin is is a decentralized form of money, which cannot be controlled by banks and central governments. And then, you know, went back again, went through all of them. They were all pretty crap. Went back to the Bitcoin one, and then okay, let's have a look at this. Took more time to investigate deeper. It was like, okay, that's interesting. Wow, that's interesting. And then when I realized how it worked, then my mind was completely blown for 3 days. And then I said, okay, I'm going to devote myself to this for the next 10 years, however many years, however long it takes. The kind of idea of where we saw it would be in 10 years actually happened within about 6 months. So that was quite extraordinary.
Right. Since you said something about me, I want to say something about you too. Amir, I believe, has also organized the first Bitcoin conference in the world ever. That was here in Prague. When was that?
Late 2011.
Just saying. I thought I wanted to make a comment as well.
Yeah, and also I think, Amir, you built the first alternative Bitcoin implementation, right?
Yeah, and I also ran the first UK Bitcoin exchange, which was the second on the market in terms of volume. I ran also the Bitcoin 2012 conference, and I made the BIP1 and contributed a lot to anonymity software in the early days, made the first version of CoinJoin, stealth addresses, did a lot of Bitcoin development, a lot of core system development.
All right, Pavol.
Pavol Luptak, Paralelní Polis. By the way, I attended both these conferences, and the second one in London was better.
That was also organized by Amir, though.
It was also organized by him.
So he's the organizer of the world's first 2 Bitcoin conferences.
Yeah, yeah. So my background, like I've finished computer science, and I'm involved for 20 years in IT security. With my friends, many years ago, we created hackerspace in Bratislava, which is called Progress Bar. It unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, but in this hackerspace in 2009 or 2010, for the first time, we had a presentation. We had a presentation about Bitcoin. So that was the place when, for the first time, I discovered Bitcoin, and then we were like a cryptoanarchists. Okay, we knew these old cypherpunks text from Timothy C. May, who predicted Bitcoins like 30 years ago, and so basically we were just waiting for like a decentralized money because he predicted it. Not only him, but also like Paul Rosenberg in his book "A Logic of Wayfaring Man." So basically, we were just waiting for something like Bitcoin, and it came in 2009. And 3-4 years later, in an artistic group I'm a member of, which is called Stohoven, we founded this place, Paralelní Polis, and we were the world's first Bitcoin coffee place in the world. So selling coffee for Bitcoins, and since the beginning, we decided to completely refuse any fiat money or any fiat payment. So we were trying to be like a really pure or crypto only place. So Yeah.
And I think Stohoven, that's like a playful political activist group. Am I saying that right? And they sort of merged their efforts with a group of hackers, and that's sort of what
Stohoven is
spawned.
quite old and quite famous, like a contemporary artistic group in the Czech Republic, maybe 20 years old. And we had like multiple different projects. The artistic style we used is called media sculpture, and Paralelní Polis is basically our only one permanent project we decided to create in 2014, and now it's 8 years basically since we started to exist.
Okay, so everyone on this panel has been involved with Bitcoin since like really the early days, like
including yourself.
I joined in 2013, so that's probably the last one of us four actually.
But you're also a very good prominent researcher and historian.
Oh, thank you.
Of Bitcoin.
That's very nice of you. So let's start with sort of the main topic of this panel, and I'll just pose it as an open question first, and then we'll see where the discussion leads us. What did you guys find when you first got involved with Bitcoin? When you first got involved with the community, and then as a follow-up question, how has that evolved over the years? So I don't know if you want to break that into two questions, but I'll just
Repeat them.
So what did you find when you first got involved with Bitcoin? What did you find in the community? What kind of culture, what kind of motivation, what kind of people were here, and how has that evolved over the years?
Should I start?
Yeah.
When I had Bitcoin, there was no community. Literally. It took quite a while till I found the first person in Berlin who was willing to come to my bar and pay for a beer in Bitcoin. I'm not mentioning his name now. Most of him, you know him probably. So that was the first other person, not from my digital circle, that was into Bitcoin. And as I said in my talk, for the first 1 or 2 or 3 years, everybody who came into Bitcoin came because they understood this is a freedom project, a liberty project, a human rights project. I think it took till, when was the run-up to $1,000 shortly before the Mt. Gox crash?
That was late 2013.
Right, and that was the first time when the exchange rate went up like this, and you had newspaper articles about this crazy thing. That was the first time that Room 77, a Bitcoin meetup, was all of a sudden flooded by men in suits with investment strategies and explaining to all of us that they found a better Bitcoin, that they found the next Bitcoin. It was quite funny because something started back then, and that was that the actual Bitcoiners, the Bitcoin meetup was every first Thursday of the month. So when the exchange rate was that high and the newspapers were full of all these investment opportunities with this new Bitcoin thing, the Bitcoin meetups were just flooded with these people. You couldn't talk anymore really about anything reasonable. You had all these shitcoiners running around in their suits telling you this is the next Bitcoin. So we made a secret Bitcoin meetup at the second Thursday of every month. And we let all the suits and journalists come on the first, and then we would meet on the second. And you could, over the times, everybody who's been in that Room 77 community will confirm this. According to the exchange rate of Bitcoin, you could predict how full the meetup will be. It's like, really, price goes up, all these suits and cameras, the thing crashes, only the Bitcoiners stay, you know, or maybe 2 or 3 of the other guys who had understood something. So this is how it changed over the time. That was very unfortunate.
How would you compare that to now? Like, has it... Go on.
This is exactly my next point. I do sense right now, and for the last few months or maybe year or something like that, I do sense a refocusing amongst people on these human rights issues, looking away from the shitcoin gambling casino. It may be due to them getting burned there, but let's be honest, people got burned in Bitcoin too. So I'm not so sure. As I mentioned in my talk, I know that in Oslo you will have a lot of talks about it's getting on the table, that Bitcoin is a human rights project, is coming back on the table. That's why I want to push that with that freedom of transaction campaign as well. But I do feel, and maybe it's only my subjective feeling, I don't know, that it's likely the focus is getting back on the human rights issues and away from the blah blah money-making Lambo moon topics.
Sure, Amir, I know you have opinions on this as well. Like, how has the Bitcoin culture or community changed over the years? What did you find at first, or if also in your case maybe there wasn't even a community yet, but like the early community, and how has that evolved over the years? Get your mic.
So when I look at my username on Bitcoin Talk, which is GENJIX, Genjix, if I look at the very first threads or topics, there are a large amount of them that are about the properties of money, the nature of government, the validity of legislation, and, people are having a lot of these topics, always, kind of preaching to the choir, kind of circular discussion, but everybody was really into it, going, oh, blah, blah, gold is the best, blah, blah, the nature of money, the evil central bank. I am an agorist, stuff like that. And I was really into it as well. Everybody else was kind of really into it. And we had these, peer-to-peer, free software, Linux group of people. That's, like where I come from originally. We had the Austrian economists, which, they're really into gold. Those libertarian types, and we had also the cryptoanarchists, which, he mentioned Timothy C. May, and those people that were inspired by those ideas. And we had the agorists, Ross Ulbricht, who made the Silk Road. He was an agorist. And the Silk Road, Dread Pirate Roberts would run these reading groups every week. People would read these sections or tracks, and he was organizing that, and they would then discuss it on the forum together. And his favorite book was a book called Alongside Night, which is a book about a group of revolutionary cadre who used free markets to overthrow the US government. And so Ross Ulbricht was really into those ideas, and that's why he built the Silk Road, which was the first major application of Bitcoin. And this place actually is a agorist center. Many of the founders are agorists or influenced by agorist ideas. Agorism is the idea that you can use markets to affect change, economic change, but also political change. And the agorists are actually a very important early community in Bitcoin. Since the history now of Bitcoin, it's been written by the victors. It's been rewritten and erased and rewritten, and a lot of details have been lost about Bitcoin's early history. As Joerg said, 2013, these men in suits with their investment strategies started to come around, and they had this attitude that, we are the professionals, and, these kids, these crazy anarchists, they've created this plaything, and if only we can kind of get it from them, we can wrestle it out of their hands, then we can bring it to market, then we could do something useful with it.
And we have to tell them how to make it better.
Yeah, exactly. So I got a lot of guys, I've been working on Bitcoin already for 3 years, writing a lot of software, and random guys that just won't leave me alone at conferences, following me about, trying to tell me their opinion. I'm I just don't care, go away. And they're like, no, you have to know, blah, blah. And going to me, Amir, you're an expert in writing code, but I'm an expert in marketing. Let me tell you how it's done. You know, and so all those guys started to come, an influx of normies, and yeah, then you know, essentially that's why we created Dark Wallet, was a way to draw a line in the sand, because there was a lot of kind of self-delusion or lying that was happening, where people were going, oh, you know, we need to get the big institutions on board, because, you know, if we bring those big institutions, then Bitcoin can infiltrate like a virus. You know, I'm not corrupt. I work for the man in the day, but I'm a libertarian ninja at night. It was just like a process of like co-option, and the kind of like leaders who put themselves in charge, like Gavin Andresen, calling himself the chief scientist, was never elected, nobody ever called him that. There's actually also another guy, I don't know, I don't want to, well, yeah, I'll say it, like, I don't think anybody ever called Roger Ver Bitcoin Jesus.
No, he called himself.
Yeah,
he
exactly.
He got the name Bitcoin Jesus because he was sitting around telling other people that he was standing at the beach, and a group of random people came around and recognized him and called, "Are you not Bitcoin Jesus?" So he called himself.
No, I think
Bitcoin
Charlie Shrem called him that. Charlie Shrem said he's like Bitcoin Jesus, and I think after that, from what I heard, Roger Ver started to tell that story himself to journalists and asking him. That's what I've heard.
He had the description on Bitcoin Talk saying popularly known as Bitcoin Jesus. And it's like, okay. But anyway,
yeah.
These kind of guys, they tried to start to cement their power over cryptocurrency, because they're like older guys, they come from the startup world, they know how things are done. You know, they've been like, you know, they've gone through it all before, and you know, they know like the way things should be done or how they should be done. And then there is all these young, like really talented.
Let me interrupt you real quick, and then we'll get to Pavol. So I think in this era, like 2014-ish, there was this really strong push to sort of legitimize Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was really marketed by, for example, the Bitcoin Foundation as, you know, it's just this payments network. It's like efficient. It's going to replace PayPal. But there were no, like the radical ideas were sort of really pushed out. And then Amir, you were kind of, you know, one of the lone voices still, you know, forwarding that narrative. But the way I see it, and I'm curious how you feel about that, is that your narrative kind of won out. Like the block size wars are a good example of that, where you were one of the first people to start warning about the risks of increasing the block size, and that idea ultimately really grabbed hold of the, like that grew, and that ultimately sort of won out. So do you feel that way? Like, do you feel that your ideas have won out and are now prevalent in the community?
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Like, but it's maybe a corruption of the ideas, but that was the point that I was getting onto, was that then ultimately it ended up working against the people that were trying to capture power, because there was a huge blowback, and that culminated in like the successive execution of all of Bitcoin's leadership. And that's kind of how we essentially arrived to today, in short.
Okay, I want to get back to that in a minute. But first, Pavol, what's your take of how have you seen the Bitcoin community evolve over the years? Has it changed, and in what ways has it changed?
As I mentioned before, for me, Bitcoin was the most, in case of Bitcoin, realized this is like a really huge liberation tool. And I was like, to be sincere, I in our cryptoanarchistic community in Bratislava and Prague, we had like a wet dreams about that. Like Bitcoin is just the tool we need to achieve crypto anarchy. Like we can finally, thanks to Bitcoin, we can implement, and we can realize markets, free markets. We can do peer-to-peer business without the government intervention, without taxation. So we were super enthusiastic about Bitcoins, and maybe in that phase we were some kind of, how to say, followers of some crypto-anarchistic sect or something like that. And basically in Bitcoin, we saw liberation of our movement. You know, thanks to Bitcoin, now the government will be less and less important. We don't need it at all. We don't need the government money. We don't need any regulators. We can do like a parallel society. And that was also the time when we discover Václav Benda, the guy who described principles or concept of parallel society more than 40 years ago in 1977 or 1978. And he wrote Paralelní Polis manifesto. And in that time, we realized that Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, crypto technologies is the tool that, thanks to this tool, we can achieve the original visions of Václav Benda 40 years, he described in his manifesto 40 years ago.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think that's a very interesting manifesto from what I've read of it. So, okay. Because this was in the Soviet era, right?
Yeah. It was not. It was like Czechoslovakia was under influence of Soviet Union, but we were not part of the Soviet Union. We were under influence, like Eastern Germany, for example. And in that time, in 70s, there was the period we used to call normalization. Normalization means that like we had a lot of the government had a lot of control. We had a lot of secret agents, something like Stasi in Germany. We have something similar like KGB. We call it STB. And they were infiltrated in the society. And thanks to this infiltration of many state agents, it was impossible to change the system, make revolution, or make demonstration, because all these people, state agents, were infiltrating the system. They were able to reveal any tries to change the system, basically. That's why we call it normalization. And in the latest 70s, there was like a dissident organization in the Czech Republic, which is called Charta 77 or Chart 77, and like a ex-president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, was one of the founders of this dissident organization. And another very important guy in this organization, Chart 77, was Václav Benda. And this guy was mathematician, so he had really like a abstract thinking, abstract mind. And he was just thinking that, okay, we have to live in a totalitarian system when the communists have full control over our society. We cannot leave the country because borders were closed. So we are basically closed in the cage. So what can we do? And he realized that what we can do, we can create a parallel society. We can create parallel society with a parallel education, a parallel culture, parallel markets, like a free market, and we can completely do all these things in parallel with the existing communistic regime. And so he was so enthusiastic about these ideas that he wrote Paralelní Polis manifesto in 1978. And this manifesto was untouched almost 40 years. And then when for the first time we revealed Bitcoin, we realized Bitcoin is exactly the tool we need to grasp, we need to use to achieve his original ideas and to promote ideas of this parallel society. Thanks to crypto technologies, we founded this place.
I think it's extremely interesting that this manifesto, it resembles so closely what the cypherpunks were thinking. It's like they had similar ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Tim May and Nick Szabo, they were talking about like Gulch for cyberspace, which is a concept from one of Ayn Rand's books, Atlas Shrugged.
So we used to call it, this is like a Parallel Polis version 2, because the first one was 40 years ago.
But getting back to the question, so how's the community evolved over these years, the Bitcoin community? That's why we were, sorry for the sidestep, everyone.
Yeah. Okay, we are still cypherpunkers, or for me, I never invested like so much money in Bitcoin because for me, Bitcoin is a liberation tool, you know, and also cryptocurrencies are like liberation tools. But many people who visited, so we started to be a place promoting cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. And I think thanks to Paralelní Polis, a lot of people in Czech Republic and Slovakia, they became like a crypto millionaires because they just realized the potential of cryptocurrencies. They invested a lot of money, and so this is like a normal cycle. We still believe that we appreciate if these people are willing to give us something back. I mean, not financially, but at least some ideas or have some talks or something like that. So yeah, of course, from 2014, it was like a commercialization of this Bitcoin or crypto scene. So I think a lot of people, businessmen, a lot of investors started to change this community quite a lot.
So,
Sorry, I just just to quickly add this idea that Pavel's talking about, Václav Benda, which is at the core of the kind of crypto-anarchists. If you read the Crypto-Anarchy Manifesto, which is talking about creating spaces where we use the cryptography to create these parallel societies, which the parallel society, it's like encoded with the DNA of anti-authoritarian new society, like the new society that will take over. And it's like resistant to attempts by authorities to take control of it. And typically, like whenever we look at any movement throughout history, for example, in Plato, in Greece, it was the academy, in France, it was reading groups, or any, revolutionary movement where you have some kind of philosophy movement behind it, or religious movements where you have the role of the church. Like there's these like parallel societies that are the actual core by how like new ideas or new intellectual culture takes over in society, and like how like things can change or develop. It's like the source of strategy. Like when you develop your intellectual culture, you raise your level of intelligence within like that movement of people to more effectively change things. You give yourself a source of ability to better able to strategize, to have more power. And the whole idea with the crypto-anarchists is that there is two kind of modalities of technology, which is right now the technology that we live under, for example, the big data, etc. It's influenced by the state ideology, but the state is like something that uses like the AI and automated weapons to like better control people. It wants to turn everything into a desert, which it can like monitor and surveil. Whereas the cryptography is something that you can use as a dark forest, or like it enables guerrillas to move, to not be under the system of surveillance. And so crypto, the energy in early Bitcoin is about this kind of liberatory vision of technology, that we can create. That's why Pavol was talking about new societies, and I was talking about the early Bitcoin talk forum had a lot of discussions about people talking like the nature of government and, about economics and, properties of money and validity of legislation. Like all of those were like, people were like, okay, there's this thing called cryptography. We've managed to make money in cyberspace. That is a big deal. Like when I first discovered Bitcoin and I saw that, the like impact or gravity of that just felt like it closed the circle that was forming, and it added like some vital piece that was missing. And then the early Bitcoin had the scripting language disabled because there was like a bug that was found in the scripting. So just like instinctively as a software engineer, you comment anything out. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to investigate what goes wrong, and I'm going to re-enable that feature later on once I fixed it. But the whole point is that feature never got switched back on in Bitcoin. But like when I, for example, met Peter Willer, he said to me, like, oh, the reason I'm into Bitcoin is not because of money, it's because of that smart contract functionality. So it was kind of like, and there used to be this early Reddit community called BitLaw, where people were discussing how can we do like polymorphic law using cryptography. So like now what we're having a renaissance in the development of cryptography. Like the last 5 years has led to like absolutely incredible mind-bending cryptography, like for example, zero-knowledge proofs, which enable an entirely new design space of anonymous engineering. So that was like all of the stuff that's happening now is the desire or dream of the people who first started with Bitcoin, saw what Bitcoin could become.
Okay, so I want to get back to something you mentioned earlier, Amir, because I think it's interesting to dive into that a little bit. So I was mentioning how I think a lot of sort of your ideas around 2013, 14 kind of became mainstream within the Bitcoin community. And then I think, if I understand you, you mentioned that that's maybe true, but they've also become corrupted versions of these ideas. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, in the same way that like Jesus was promoting like.
Are you comparing yourself to
Jesus? No. Sorry, no, I'm not. Definitely not. No. I was just saying that like whenever there's an idea in its early phases, you know, like Christianity started as a rebellion of the slaves, but it ended up into a very kind of authoritarian religious institution. In fact, the Catholics ended up persecuting and genociding the original Christians, which were the Nestorians. So
what ideas in Bitcoin have become corrupted then, or what of like these ideas that you were advocating?
Well,
back then?
as I was saying, a lot of the reason people came into Bitcoin early on is because it was an all-encompassing vision of what would be enabled to be built using this technology. However, now there is a very rigid economic ideology that is very dominant in Bitcoin, which in the early days was good because it had like enough power in its ideas to give direction and impetus forwards. But like now has actually become in some sense regressive. All the like talented financial researchers, people developing cryptography, developers have migrated out of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is experiencing a huge brain drain and a very anti-intellectual culture, which is eventually if Bitcoin dies, it won't be because the state tried to ban it. In fact, the state trying to ban cryptocurrency, like if they tried to ban DarkFi would, or if the state tried to ban cryptocurrency in general, then Monero and DarkFi and those currencies would moon. Like everybody would like realize exactly what those communities have been saying is right. So that's not the problem with Bitcoin, is the state. The problem is like it's something inside of it, and it has to recognize that.
No, guys. What brain drain are you talking about? And
every single good cryptographer is not working in Bitcoin. Every single cryptographer that's of note.
Right. I do understand too little of cryptography on a technological level to be able to judge that. But please don't tell that to these people working on Bitcoin, right?
Well, and so when it comes to conservatism, which I think you mentioned, are you referring to, for example, making upgrades to the Bitcoin protocol? Is that,
for example, one of the things that I think is very bad is how there's an intolerance of alternative Bitcoin implementations, which just leads to a clique that wants to dominate development and squat there, occupying a position of power that like nobody can ever change anything. So, for example, what they say is there can't be multiple implementations, because if there were multiple implementations, then, they said you can't have a spec of the Bitcoin protocol, because if you have a spec, then anybody can implement the spec, say, look, it's implemented. You can even get formal verification, or you can get those companies that do like code review, and they give you certification. You can say, look, I implemented the spec as is. And then you can write tests, test that the implementations meet the rules of the spec, etc. And like there are scientists who know how to do that work. But the Bitcoin developers, Bitcoin core developers say there cannot be a spec, a formal spec, written because Bitcoin is written in C++, and there are parts of C++ that are not spec'd. So therefore, you can't spec Bitcoin. The thing is C++ is a fully spec'd language, 100%. The only parts of C++ that do not have a spec is something called undefined behavior. Undefined behavior, according to the C++ standard, if you invoke undefined behavior, if it's possible for your program to invoke it any time in the future, then your entire program is invalid. Your entire program can compile to anything at all. And so essentially what they're saying is that, we are relying on undefined behavior or bugs in the source code, undefined behavior in C++. That's absolutely mental. That's like really crazy. Like the proper thing is to fix your software and allow multiple implementations to exist. My friend, wait, just to finish, my friend Eric Voskill, he wrote Bitcoin takes 8 hours to sync, and the blockchain state keeps getting bigger, etc. My friend Eric Voskill, he wrote a version of a Bitcoin full node that syncs within 15 minutes. And he needs 2 million to take that from a prototype to a full production ready software. That's a very big deal. That's a very important piece of development on the software system level. But he needs 2 million to do that, and there's not money in Bitcoin development. It's impossible to find 2 million. I spoke to many people. The incentive is just not there. Meanwhile, in Ethereum, for example, Ross Ulbricht, he did the free Ross DAO, and he was able to raise more than 20 million for his defense. He's a martyr of Bitcoin. He's essentially prison in life, because he promoted Bitcoin. He did the biggest service to Bitcoin out of all of us, out of anyone in Bitcoin community, Ross Ulbricht. But he's in prison for life. And on Ethereum, he was able to raise more than 20 million through there's a lot of public goods funding research and DAOs and infrastructure and support for that on Ethereum. Then for the second NFT that they raised now, all the Bitcoin maxis said, no, you have to do it on Bitcoin, not on ETH. He barely raised 200K. That is a shame, deep shame. That, like, for example, I worked on Bitcoin for many years, and all the money that I had, I put it back into developing Bitcoin. And I ended up with nothing from Bitcoin development. There was no way for people who were contributing to the Bitcoin system to capture back some of that value that they were creating. I created literally billions of dollars worth of value. However, other people that I got into Bitcoin early, they, like businessmen, bag holders, like absolute like motherfuckers, like people that I don't approve of, got very, very rich, extremely rich. So there's a perverse, like the more that we recognize it, we can have a discussion, there's a perverse incentive system there. So then you might go, okay, but Bitcoin, it's complete. Like what needs to change about Bitcoin? The thing is, like the new technologies now, they're coming out. For example, I talked about zero-knowledge proofs, but it's not the only thing.
Yes, Amir, at one point at a time, maybe.
Really, how is anybody going to answer, Amir? Can I throw a few points in?
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing about the spec real quick. I think one of the problems is also that no one has the authority to create that. And then even if there was a spec and the software does different things and people are accepting money, then I think the spec would just be overruled. Or at least that's an argument against having that. Like it wouldn't actually do anything. There's
that. There's Satoshi himself who said alternative implementations are not a good idea, which I never really understood. There are alternative implementations that just exist. Nobody holds anybody back from writing an alternative implementation. So I cannot at all follow your Bitcoin is under authoritarian control or something like that when it comes to this regard, to your concerns about funding. The funding of open source software is a global problem, not only in Bitcoin. It is a huge problem. I remember I read this post from some open source developer the other day who said, right, there is this company paying me 25,000 to write this or that for Linux so they can use it for their products. And he was like, they're offering me 25,000. I can already sell a backdoor to what I'm going to write for 400,000 on the black markets. What am I going to do? So open source development funding is a problem. But I am telling you, I know that developers in Bitcoin do get funding, and I do know that firsthand. So, yeah, there's that. Maybe in the Ethereum universe, you do have VCs who throw money literally at everything that moves and can write a line of code. Maybe this is a difference. And in regards to Ross, come on, the first years supporting Ross, all that money came from Bitcoin. I did fundraising. I walked around and asked people, look, you made so much money with Bitcoin. That guy who helped you do that, because he promoted Bitcoin and he made people want to have Bitcoin to use on his platform, so they came to you to buy it, throw some money at it, and I know they did. So it's not as black and white as you are describing it here right now.
Okay, let's get back to sort of the main thread where we left off, which was how the culture has sort of changed. And Pavol, you mentioned something about this as well. I think it's the common denominator, and maybe I'm simplifying, but early people were, very ideologically motivated, and this has evolved more into, we have this meme of number go up. Would that summarize it, that it's too much number go up? Or
it summarizes it, as I said, from my point of view, but I see like in waves. As I said, I do really see and feel a refocusing on the human rights topic, as opposed to the. I think most people who want to get rich very quickly don't go into Bitcoin anymore. They do go into the altcoin space, because there you can have your 1000x. You won't have 1000x in Bitcoin next week or this year or anything like that. So maybe that is a reason why they more and more get out,
Pavol?
I think that mainstream adoption of Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies are just happening. It also unfortunately means like the governments, they're approving new regulations, new taxes, crypto taxes. For example, in Slovakia, you have to pay almost 40% from if you want to sell crypto or Bitcoin. It's crazy.
Capital gains.
Yeah, capital gains. Which in Germany, it's just
it's 25 up to a year.
Yeah,
after
up to 1 year.
Yeah. After that, it's zero.
So, but for me, what is the biggest problem and the biggest challenge for Bitcoin is definitely lack of fungibility, because like we are from these crypto-anarchistic roots, and the thing is that I still believe that there shouldn't be something like tainted bitcoins, for example. The bad blacklisted bitcoins or good bitcoins. And so I still believe that Bitcoin should work as a digital cash, and it unfortunately it doesn't. So I still believe that companies like change analysis shouldn't exist. So the thing is, I think that one of the biggest challenge for the Bitcoin community should be to make everything to improve privacy of Bitcoins, because some people used to say that the Bitcoin itself is the biggest NFT. It's the first NFT. Yes, Bitcoin is the first NFT, and it shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be. So the thing is that So I think this privacy is extremely important, and especially in these days when government we have like a centralized.
So privacy is important, and I think everyone in this room will agree with that. But I want to ask sort of the next question. So if you look at Bitcoin or digital cash or what the cypherpunks were thinking about and creating in the early 90s, there was really the privacy aspect. So, being able to make anonymous transactions, and the monetary reform aspect, which I would say during the cypherpunk era was probably actually of lesser importance, but it was there. Like Nick Szabo was thinking about that, Tim May was thinking about that. It was definitely there as well. now we're here with Bitcoin. And I think actually the sound money, the digital gold, that narrative, that's sort of a very natural thing for people to adopt. You don't actually have to do a lot for that because people want to get rich. And if there's money that doesn't inflate, that sort of all the incentives align for that to be adopted.
You don't have to want to become rich. It's enough to not to want to become poor.
Right. Yeah. Privacy, however, like are the incentives aligned enough for people to start caring about that? Or when, apart from the people in this room, like are we just doomed? Are people just never going to care about that? Or what will need to happen for people to start caring about that?
For example, what I can tell you is, like recently, quite bad accident happened to me. Like a lot of customer paid me in bitcoins, for example, and I still have to use like a crypto card. So I top up my bitcoins to my card, and just because I received $100 transaction in Bitcoin, which were tainted bitcoins, this service completely blocked my account with more than 10K euros, and I was completely innocent in this situation, you know. So the thing is, when more and more centralized services, centralized crypto exchanges, centralized services start to block your account just because you receive random tainted bitcoins, more and more people start to realize that fungibility is a real thing, that we shouldn't distinguish between the good and bad bitcoins, you know, and all coins should be the same. So we need these negative experiences, user experiences, a lot of angry people just because this is happening, you know.
It needs to become a problem.
And this is like a really bad. So, for example, my 10K in euros is just locked. I cannot move this money because some innocent person pick up his Bitcoin from some random Bitcoin ATM machine. You know, like this shouldn't happen. You know, like
this is, you will see, your wish will be fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I have the same. A funny anecdote about this. I've been to some financial conference where they asked me to hold a talk about Bitcoin, and I met I went to several of these events by financial industry people, and I kept meeting this one guy from BaFin, the German financial regulator, Bundesaufsicht für Finanzen. And because he was the guy at the time for Bitcoin, so he went there as well. One evening before the actual event, I run into him in the hotel bar of the hotel where I am. And we actually got drunk together on Hefeweizen and whiskey, which was very funny. This was one moment where I found out, after like an hour, he mentions that he finds Bitcoin so cool because last night he bought a new sword in his online game with Bitcoin. And you have Bitcoin? And his answer was like, yeah, of course I have Bitcoin. I'm not stupid, am I? You know, this is a financial regulator. This is, on a side note, everybody from state organizations or banks who I have met and talked to, who understood Bitcoin, who were forced by their employer to understand Bitcoin. You're the guy for Bitcoin now. You have to learn about it, yeah? And then we need an expert on Bitcoin. All these people, be they police, be they bank, be they financial regulators, they all have Bitcoin. This is the Trojan horse thing that maybe you did a bit misinterpret. I see the Trojan horse thing of Bitcoin as exactly that. Because I'm like, these are the people who are supposed to, at the end, regulate and prohibit it, but they actually have the highest incentive themselves not to do so. But the actual point I was trying to make about, and I was talking to him, I was like, so you have Bitcoin, so would you want your transaction to buy that sword in your online game? Would you want that to have blocked, or should it be surveyed and monitored, and somebody else should decide if you can buy the sword or not? And he was like, no, of course not. And he was like, I don't give a shit about private people's transactions. He was like, this is not my business. He explained what I'm trying to do, and this was after Mt. Gox, it was like, I don't want Germany's grandmas to get goxed and lose their retirement savings. My mission is to regulate exchanges, to make them safe and secure and everything. And I can do that by putting all these regulations on them and just And there was a moment where I realized, dude, we're on the same side, you know, because I want people to take their money off exchanges and not use exchanges as wallets. I want them to put their Bitcoin in their own wallet. And the more you regulate the shit out of exchanges, so they have to annoy their customers, the more you drive them into their own wallet. I was like, yeah, high five, Mr. Financial Regulator, we're fighting on the same side. So you will see more of these problems, and I also think, whoever gets burnt by the banks nowadays will discover Bitcoin.
Now, it also means in my situations that for me it's becoming risky to accept bitcoins from random people.
All right.
That's important to say. So because of that, because like random people can threaten me by their tainted bitcoins, I'm thinking to accept only Monero or Lightning or, you know, like or DarkFi or, you know, some fungible cryptocurrency. And that's the thing, you know, like.
When it comes to narrative around privacy, so I at one point wrote an article for Bitcoin Magazine years ago, and it was about like different techniques to improve privacy on Bitcoin. And then the image we used was like one of the images you'd find here. Like it was like masked people. It was like a dark, shadowy image. And then someone on Twitter called us out and said, "You shouldn't use that. You should use a picture of happy people in a park smiling. Like privacy is normal. Privacy isn't scary. Privacy is something that everyone should have, and that will lead us to a better future. That's the message we should be conveying." So I think I know Amir will have something to say on this, because you very explicitly did the opposite on this. I thought he had a good point, but you explicitly did the opposite. Like you branded dark market as dark market and it's for criminals, and then you followed it up with a video where you were holding a big gun. And so what do you think about this idea that privacy should be, how should it be marketed? I guess I know your answer, but I still want to hear it. What do you think about the critique that I got, that we should market it as something that's happy and that's for everyone and that's normal?
I don't think it's valid. As I said, like Silk Road was genuinely popular. A lot of what attracts people to cryptocurrency is a desire. It's like during the coronavirus, I saw a lot of sci-fi movies. I saw sci-fi movies from the 90s, and I saw sci-fi movies from now, 80s, all of them. And the thing is that the sci-fi in the 90s, you know, it's always like, oh, you know, perfect, happy society, and then bam, Godzilla or aliens or, you know, tsunami or some catastrophe. Whereas, and that kind of, you know, was shattered 2001 with the collapse of the Twin Towers. And it kind of, you know, shows, you know, the mentality of that time where, you know, we had just won against the Soviet Union. This was it. This was the triumph, the end of history. And now we had to just optimize to perfection. And all these movies, or there's always some other that like comes in, some terrorist, and destroys everything. The sci-fi now, though, it's very brooding. It's like post-apocalyptic. There's a lot of like you know, things are unknown. You know, it's reflective of the general mindset of society where you know, everybody I speak to feels that in the next 5 years or so, that there's going to be a major macro political or economic event of some kind. We don't know what it is, but we just feel that something big is going to happen. And this is the kind of climate that we're heading into. And so, you know, we do a lot of also speculation and market research on cryptocurrencies. And, you know, we also did last year very well by betting on all the alternative layer ones. And, you know, from the coronavirus, there was that big dip, and then there was this big, strong Bitcoin narrative, store of value that took time to take root. But as we started to enter the latter part of the cycle, you know, people started to get bored with Bitcoin and started to explore more around the ecosystem and say, okay, what else is there? And then the main narrative that got picked up that year was about alternative L1s. There are a lot of, like, you know, VC kind of, you know, he was talking about these guys in suits. They get free money essentially from the central bank. Crypto founders make projects. They issue tokens in the project to fund development. And then they sell a portion of their labor to these VCs who get free money from the central banks and then give it to people who actually need the cash. And that money that they get is from an old boys network where they act and behave in a certain way. And so what's interesting is that as the crypto market goes upwards, the money narratives go upwards. It's reflexive. So as the price go upwards, more people come in, more people get excited, the thing pumps. And that's until it bursts. The interesting thing is when you look at there was all this money coming in, there are all these VCs, they're all talking about, you know, the same things about like legitimization and, you know, working with regulators. You know, they gave that, they testified before Congress recently. So all of that is connected to the bull market phase. And typically what we've seen is that when a bear market hit, you know, people start to retract. They start to it's like during the recession in the US, you know, the Great Depression. That Great Depression was prolonged because there's a certain moralization that happened where people started to go, you know, it's wrong to spend too much. It's wrong to have too much money. And so in a bear market in crypto, Bitcoin typically is a shift back towards Bitcoin. And the kind of, the thing is with those bullish narratives about working with regulators is they're an example of a fragile narrative, which as soon as the regulator push back, even in the slightest against cryptocurrency, it shatters that narrative. Whereas the counter, and he's talking about the marketing thing here, the counter narrative about, you know, the crypto's mission, core mission is irreconcilable with that of the financial system, of the regulators. The more that they push back, the more that empowers us as a movement of people, the more our ideas become stronger. Because typically, always in history throughout revolutions, revolutionary organizations start very small, very marginal. They're saying like, they're all very committed and dedicated to their philosophy. They have a very strong philosophy, but they're like marginal. Most people think they're just like a crazy cult. That's the power of cults, by the way. And that's also the power behind Bitcoin. But they insist and they insist. And then when crises happen, then they say, look, this is what we were saying all along. And then people's mindset shifts. And that's what happened with, for example, the Nazis, with many, many different movements throughout history. And then they start to grow hugely. So our kind of investment thesis right now is that the market is ripe for remoralization. It happened with Bitcoin, as I said, where we killed the leaders. We haven't had another one yet. So that's the next phase of the market.
You've got an investment thesis. You need a suit, man.
We're just a small ship trying to sail across the ocean.
So the privacy narrative, like, to be clear, I'm definitely not suggesting that it should be watered down or anything like that. It's just, where do you focus on? How do you get it into people's heads?
As I was saying, I was saying, like, all of these sci-fi that come out now, you know, they're very dark, they're very brooding, they have these post-apocalyptic themes. Why? Because people are fascinated with these ideas. People are innately attracted to this direction we're going into, which is partly a catastrophe, but it's the reality that we are heading, we are approaching a dawn that is the beginning of a very long night, which is the end of Western civilization. So the thing is that the message that we're bringing to people should not be a lie. And interestingly, always people talk about the sun and the moon or the night. And the thing is that all throughout mythology and history, including, for example, the Aztecs, the Sumerians, the sun god is a symbol of state power, a symbol of authority, a hot, static object that hangs in the sky. The moon is something that has cycles in sync with the woman's feminine cycle. You know, the moon is also reflected with the forest and with mountains and diversity. The state wants to turn everything into a desert where everything can be surveilled and watched. That's the surveillance paradigm. The moon is like the moon and the forest. It gives cover for gorillas to move around. That's the shade that cryptography gives us. That's why cryptography is. I have this concept that, for example, if you look on,
Amir, hang on,
I just finished this last point. If you look on Wikipedia about hard power, Wikipedia will say that hard power is military and economic. But I have this idea that maybe cryptography is a third form of hard power, an untapped one. That's our strength.
If I can answer to your question regarding privacy. Okay, so I'm from IT security background, and usually people start to care about security where they are compromised. So they are hacked, for example, by some hackers. Their sensitive information just revealed. And it's the same about privacy of cryptocurrencies. Now, when more and more people will be compromised by the government, for example, when we can see that a lot of KYC providers, for example, were hacked, like millions of KYC profiles leaked. You know, so we are starting to realize that just gathering a lot of sensitive information and centralized crypto exchange probably can be used more for it's like likely this information will be misused, that they will help, for example, to reveal some organized crime, for example. So we need real experiences when our privacy is compromised, because we are using like a Bitcoin, like a transparent Bitcoin with transparent blockchain history. And when this information is compromised, average common people, they will start to look like a more privacy in cryptocurrencies. Quite easy.
Joerg, do you want to add anything to this topic of narrative or marketing privacy? Not marketing Bitcoin itself, perhaps?
I was not with Amir back then when he marketed and branded his privacy and fungibility focused projects, anonymity focused projects the way he did, but it's his brand, right? I'm of a different opinion, but I cannot judge this. I do, though, absolutely agree with Pavol that is probably the biggest problem in Bitcoin is the lack of fungibility. Is a bigger problem than scalability or anything else. And unfortunately, I'm not a technology person enough to solve it. But it needs to be solved, yes. We need to make some progress there. We need to be faster than Chainalysis and these people, because you rightfully say they shouldn't exist, but they do exist, and we will not, and more will be coming. They will be getting better, and we are not going to stop that.
I strongly believe that companies like Change Analyze that they shouldn't exist. Imagine you have like a SSH protocol or you have HTTPS protocol. Imagine that now we will have like commercial companies for cracking HTTPS.
I'm with you. SSH, I'm totally with you.
What?
But it's not going to happen. They're not going to go away.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have about 15 minutes left. Should we take some questions from the audience?
Yes, please.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone have a question? I see one, at least one.
Thanks. So I have a question. Paralelní Polis is parallel society, right? And Amir, in your talk, you talked about the early tensions of when Bitcoin was trying to be presented to mainstream society, right? And then in a later talk, and now again, we've heard complaints about, some exchanges don't like mixed Bitcoins or tainted with something and so on. And there is an inherent tension, right? Because we have privacy and freedom, and there are reasons why mainstream society is afraid of them, and there's always an inherent tension there. But on the other side, it's clear that there are certain benefits of the Bitcoin world being interactive, let's say, with the broader society. And I'd like you, for four of you, to kind of elaborate on like what your thoughts are from today on like what do you think is possible and what do you think is desirable in terms of interplay between this the cypherpunk parallel thing and the mainstream thing.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I basically fully agree with Joerg's thoughts on that issue. So I'll just let Joerg answer the question on behalf of me, essentially. So Joerg gave a talk about how, well, I'll let you explain, Joerg.
What are you talking about? So we were talking about the merging of the cypherpunk fungibility ideals and the mainstream completely transparent world. I say the mainstream world has to adapt, right? No, bullshit. The point here is, and Amir probably has very strong opinions about this as well. It looks to me like if we make achievements in regards to Bitcoin's privacy and fungibility, and the mainstream financial world does not give up their stance of, no, you need to be entirely transparent, we could see kind of a split between, an official Bitcoin and a non-official or dark Bitcoin. We could even, but that would mean that fungibility is really entirely broken. It could mean that we have two different prices for these two different Bitcoins. And where this ship is going, I don't have any idea. I would hope that what Pavol thinks is going to happen, that what I think is going to happen, that people will get so annoyed at some stage with their banks. And this is getting more and more. What just happened to Pavol happened to me 2 times this year. That I refused to answer stupid questions to a bank. And they said like, right, then we're not going to serve you anymore. I would hope that so many people are getting annoyed by their bank that they come over to that side. How it's going to play out, I don't have any idea. And we will have to see.
So I'll give the answer that I thought you were going to give then.
Okay, please.
Well, so essentially I think, Bitcoin, you can solve privacy problems on Bitcoin on a technical level, but I think it's basically equally important that we solve the problem on a social level. Like the right to have private transactions needs to be something that's embedded in consciousness of society in the same way that the right to freedom of speech is. Like that is an actual fundamental part of the equation to achieve
but you have
what we're trying to achieve.
Here you have a a problem on a larger scale. And it's not only privacy in transactions, it's privacy altogether. And that is what we are losing as a society. The demand for user-defined privacy that I can define, which of my ramblings, which of my transactions, whatever, which of my holdings of something, like I run a little charity, there non-anonymity in regards to the receiving address is quite a cool thing, because you can have a static address. You can say, on this address we need this and that much money to receive, then we can put this or that project into reality, and people can literally see how much money goes there. That is a wonderful thing. I don't need anonymity. That's why we call it user-defined privacy. For my own shit, I don't want anybody to know what's on my Bitcoin addresses. But as I said, it's not only a financial problem in the financial system to not have privacy, and that people more and more, you know, the narrative, if you don't have anything to hide, you don't have anything to fear, is so mainstream when it comes to communication, you know, and you will have the same in financial transactions. So I think the struggle for privacy is actually a bigger one than just for transactions.
Amir, do you want to?
Maybe you let Pavol first, because he's much shorter than you.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Pavol.
That was a joke, right?
Yeah, I think this is the what you can see is like a polarization of society, because we can still see like a crypto mainstream society. These people think that if they don't do anything bad, they don't need any privacy. Unfortunately, it's still mainstream idea or mainstream thoughts that we shouldn't care about privacy. And still, I still think that these people, they need this negative experience, unfortunately. You know? So like a closing bank account or some kind of discrimination, and they will see it. It's quite likely in the future we will have like a good government approved bitcoins and like a bad bitcoins which are not like a clean KYC approved. So I don't like this situation, but we should expect it, that this may happen in the future, especially if you are not able to solve like a fungibility very soon. So yeah, I'm quite afraid about this, and I also agree with Amir that if governments started to ban cryptocurrencies, we should definitely expect like a moon of truly anonymous cryptocurrencies, like Monero, for example, or you mentioned DarkFi. So yeah.
Amir.
So let's flip the script a little bit, because a lot of these arguments often fall down to moral arguments of, like, you know, there is the people demanding anonymity and sovereignty at the expense of society. So I would actually argue that most of the world is the black market. That actually, when we're making these kind of discussions, we're talking about the ability of like first world countries to maintain dominion and hegemony. The US is deeply corrupt, working through international organizations such as WEF and IMF, which essentially engage in predatory financial practices to hijack or take over other countries, including assassinating political leaders, which and you know, for example, when I discuss about the morality of people, I'm like, you know, do we realize that 2 million people died in Iraq and in the Middle East over our desire to protect Western standard of living, to have access to cheap oil? So a lot of countries now are recognizing the arrangement of this formerly unipolar world with the US at the center, maintaining financial hegemony is not in their interests. And there is a slow breakup of world power, for example, with the rise of China and Russia, which is the world is shifting to a multipolar state. And also the process of de-dollarization of how countries are trying to escape from the orbit of the US financial sphere. So against that backdrop, like the anonymity and also oppressed peoples, like for example Kurds who are fighting against Turkish fascists, trying to eliminate them from existence. So it's like, do I really care about first world normies who are like integrated into the system? Probably in a world collapse scenario, they are the ones that have the most to lose, actually. Whereas, like, new people, new groups have the most to gain. And so I do think crypto is going to split into two, essentially. There will be the RegFi, which will be regulated and controlled and legislated, and there will be the DarkFi, which will be underground and outside of government control. This bifurcation, like the more the governments push back, the more it causes an escalation. It's essentially inevitable. It's due to the nature of the narratives and how they're locked in together.
Very valid point about this difference here between the Western world and all these other areas of the world that have more people living there who want their freedom. Very valid point, thanks.
Yeah. Maybe time for one last question if anyone has. I'll go. Yeah, give Vlad the mic.
Hi. So all of you have spoken about privacy improvements to Bitcoin. And I was wondering if you have any preference in regards to how that should be accomplished. Because we can either do it softly with sidechains, with coin joins, with coin swaps and whatever, or we can acknowledge that at some point Bitcoin is going to need a hard fork, and we can agree that we can also include confidential transactions or
it's
something.
It's not going to happen.
But
your question is already answered, that hard fork is not going to happen.
Well, there should be one that happens due to a bug.
Yeah, at some point in the future, there will have to be a hard fork for that time stamp.
Yeah, that one.
Issue. Like
when is that?
90 years from now or something.
Right, I don't care.
I don't know exactly.
I mean, we can also approach that preemptively and say we should do it now as opposed to later.
I think it's going to be what you call the soft way. I think so.
But it's about your preference, not necessarily what you think will happen.
It is probably my preference. I am a burned child when it comes to fighting against hard forks. So when I hear the word hard fork, something in my neck goes up like this. But I think it's going, and this is what I believe, and this is what I would wish for, that we find solutions on side chains or other such means to solve this problem. Whereas, of course, that draws another line of problems behind it, because you still have the movements on the chain that can be analyzed. But then I'm really not the technology person enough to make suggestions here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally not excluding any option, really. I don't know what developers will come up with in the future, and I think we should be open to even hard forks if the solution is good enough. It will be very hard to get consensus on a hard fork, obviously. It would be preferable if we find a soft fork way to do it, for example. Or even maybe even neither, if someone comes up with something clever, which, people have over the years, like CoinJoin and what's the thing Belcher is working on? Coin swap, and, there are solutions. But I personally wouldn't exclude any possibility when it comes to improving privacy.
If anybody wonders why Aaron is holding his hand there all the time, the point is we cannot see you there. It's these lights, right? Just as an explanation.
Thanks, Joerg.
I think that we in Bitcoin we already have like many hard forks, And I think this is like extremely important. So I think if there is like consensus, it can be done by hard fork for sure. Yeah, why not?
But what kind of hard fork? Like, what would you add to it? Would you make it with ring signatures like Monero, or do you have a preference since you were now with proofs?
I'm a Monero guy, so I like this Monero technology. So like ring signature, for example, stored addresses. Yeah, I would let this like answer to like Bitcoin core developers, but I think anything like this would or could significantly improve current privacy. So basically, I would appreciate any solution proposed by the community, any privacy
I mean,
solution.
it's probably, if you want to reach consensus for a hard fork, it's probably very important that you don't lose any of the existing properties, right? Like you being able to verify how many coins there are, like that's a property that people will care about. So you probably can't do a hard fork to the ring signature. No, that's not ring signature. The hiding amounts. What's that called? Confidential transactions. You probably can't do that because it can't gain consensus because some people actually want that. So, you know, for a privacy solution to come up, it would probably have to have no downsides. And I don't think any of these exist yet, apart from things like coin swap or coin join. Amir, do you have an answer? Do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, and this is my expertise. I implemented CoinJoin. I was the first to implement CoinJoin and stealth addresses, which they're basically garbage. They can't be used. I also implemented ring signatures. That's also, I managed to get it down to a few seconds for 100,000, which is pretty good, like very, very good compared to Monero, which can only do like, I guess like 10 or so. But unfortunately, when you're against the state level actor, they can fill the anonymity set with fake coins, and so therefore your true anonymity is much smaller. So the only true anonymity you can get is full anonymity. I implemented Mimblewimble, but contrary to their claims, the graph is actually visible, so it's not anonymous. I implemented also 1 out of n commitments to 0, which is used by based on Lalantis is based off of that. That's actually a good privacy scheme. It's not very well known about. It's by Jens Gruff originally, but it exists in another project called Firo. Also implemented